Hi gang, ever thought your games of Horus Heresy were just going too well? Well, have I got an army list for you. Out on PDF only is this, the Imperialis Militia list, the most flexible list in the game, and the one that will be most difficult to win with. Good luck. Welcome back to this, the army guide for the latest and weirdest army in the Horus Heresy, the Imperialis Militia. Want to field endless hordes of really useless humans in your galactic civil war, and then watch them get ripped to shreds by all the more horrifically dangerous things in the 31st millennium? Well then, this is the army for you. With the Imperialis Militia, you can lead cavalry charges from feral planets, field legions of indentured penal troops, represent the hordes of cultists that followed the traitor legions, or play as the slightly more high-tech enclaves of humanity that persisted throughout Old Night. At its core, the list is designed to represent the forces of the Excurtus Imperialis. As the Crusade fleets of the Imperium pushed onwards through the galaxy, they encountered and incorporated all the various human cultures they came into contact with, and their armies became part of the Crusade, along with the armies of the various regions of Terra and the solar system that had been conquered way back in the Unification Wars. These regular human armies, organized in a million different ways, essentially became second or third-line auxiliaries to the legions, garrisoning worlds, assisting with stamping out rebellions, and cleaning up pockets of resistance after the juggernaut of the Astartes legions had just moved on. And then Horus's rebellion broke out, and of course forces from the militia could then be found on both sides. The Imperialis Militia list that encompasses all of this is a really thematic, really flexible army list that can represent pretty much whatever you want, but it also comes with a bit of work involved because it's not really like all the other armies. First, the list only exists as a PDF. In the first version of the Horus Heresy game, this army was called the Imperialis Militia in Cults, published in one of the Black Books, and in Heresy's current edition, the list has been kept alive as a free download from the Games Workshop site. So there's no book to buy. And second, and probably bigger, there are no models. Or at least, it's a list designed for you to use any models you want in it. Anything from 40k Astra Militarum, the obvious choice, or Chaos Cultists, to old hammer metal squats, which means if you already own some of those models, this can be a really good way of getting into the heresy for free. I mean, you'll need a few. And for those already playing, it can add a really thematic allied detachment to an existing army. But be warned, you might struggle using them against any of the others. The human troops of the Imperium did not fare well in an inter-legion civil war, often used as cannon fodder by the rest of the armies involved, and this is really well represented on the table. In fact, I played as Imperialis Militia all the way through the first version of Heresy, and yeah, 200 or 300 idiots with autoguns and 5 super heavy tanks might sound good, and it certainly looks scary, but once your opponent starts mowing them down with AP5 bolter fire, scaring them away at the drop of a hat, and popping your old third-line vehicles with crack missiles, things can turn pretty quickly. Okay, before I start these rundowns, I usually do a few disclaimers, but a lot of them don't apply here. I'll go through the list and I'll show you where to get these models, but there are no models, so I'll give suggestions and I'll show you what I used in my army. I usually include not only core units, but also extended units from PDFs, but this entire army is an extended unit from a PDF, so that doesn't matter. And finally, I'm not going to tell you what units are best or worst, just rest assured that every unit in the army is worst. If you want to play a competitive war game, there are just other games out there that are better for that, and any other army. Okay, let's begin with the army special rules. The Imperialis Militia have a couple of new unit subtypes, and all of them are designed to show just how terrible regular humans are. The Militia subtype applies to pretty much all your infantry models, and makes them run away a lot, I guess. Militia units below half strength can't regroup, they just keep falling back until they run off the table. If they're charged when falling back, they're destroyed, and if they're charged by a new unit while they're already locked in assault, they have to pass a morale check, or immediately run away. The third line subtype does kind of the same thing for all your tanks. All glancing hits on third line vehicles count as penetrating hits, but on the other hand, militia vehicles are so useless that your opponent can't score victory points for killing them. And finally, the mechanized subtype, which only applies to sentinels, so we'll get to that when we look at them. We start our list with the Imperialis Militia Force Commander, the single character that will define your Imperialis Militia army the most. The Force Commander can represent anything from a planetary governor to a tribal chief, and because of that, he comes with a ton of options. He starts with a basic human leader stat line, pistol, and close combat weapon. The basic close combat weapon stat line you see in this list just means use your native strength, and that's it. He then has access to all the pistols and close combat weapons you'd expect, and then a few you don't, like blast pistols and needle pistols. There's a lot of needle weapons in this list. And then he gets a selection of protective equipment. He starts with 5-up flak armor and a refractor field, but he can take carapace armor or even power armor and an iron halo. He can also be upgraded to a mounted force commander, which makes him cavalry and increases his move speed and gives him access to a lance, but we'll get into all that when we look at all the cavalry units later on. Anyway, all that's kind of academic. It's difficult to kit him out to be a real threat. No, the Force Commander is useful because he unlocks the warlord traits and provenances that allow you to customize this army. Plus, he's mandatory. All the other HQ options are support squads, which means the Force Commander will be your only HQ option in an allied detachment. Anyway, if you are running a full army, then the militia lists get a selection of 6 warlord traits, many of them taken from the old Renegades and Heretics army lists in books like The Siege of Vrax or Imperial Armor 13. Your warlord could be a ruthless tyrant, which gives them Fear 1 that affects your own models too, but does allow you to kill a few models in a fleeing friendly unit to force them to regroup. Your commander could be a merchant princeling, upgrading all their personal weapons to mastercrafted and allowing you to upgrade one unit to a lifeguard unit who gain the heavy rule and can reroll 1s when shooting. If the commander is beloved of the people, then the rest of the army gets really angry when he's inevitably killed and go on the rampage in the following assault phase, and making them an uncompromising marcher lord improves morale, making the whole army immune to fear and allowing you to ignore the first pinning check each turn. The connoisseur of alien curios gets a one-use random artifact, and the robber baron might gain furious charge, but then he has to pause to steal stuff, giving away victory points while they do so. All very silly. But the biggest advantage of the Force Commander is the Muster of Worlds special rule that allows you to select provenances of war for your army. These are the equivalent of Astartes Rights of War or Solar Auxilia Doctrines, special rules that apply to every militia unit in the army and grant them special abilities, change battlefield roles, or unlock new equipment. There are 15 provenances, and your Force Commander can pick 2 and combine them, which is a ton of options. As actually mentioned in this document, it's worth picking out these before you select the rest of the army. I'll run through these here, and then at the end, I'll go through how I'd combine them in my various human armies in 30k. Okay, let's go through them. Warrior Elite is pretty simple. You're actually good at being soldiers. Everyone gets +1 leadership, and the base leadership of this army is 5, so that's useful. In addition, Levy squads, that's the conscript troops option, which we'll get to in a bit, become support squads, and Grenadier squads, the more elite troops option, lose support squads. So you're going to have a little bit more of an elite troops choice. Legacy of the Great Crusade represents old Imperial Army regiments from the Crusade era and grants all your more veteran units, that's your Grenadiers and Command Squads, +1 ballistic skill. Clanfolk Levy is the first one that really changes force organization. Representing primitive worlds, this provenance makes cavalry squads, normally fast attack, into troops. It also requires you to take them as compulsory troops and grants those compulsory troops units +1 leadership. So if you want your doomed cavalry charge, this is it. Gene crafted is a bit more complex. Every individual unit's been genetically altered, usually in ways that make them sneakier, so they each have to roll on this table before the battle, which will probably give them either fleet, move through cover, or night vision, but might make them sick or have the bonus effect of making them really brave in some way. Cyber Augmetics represents soldiers from a technologically advanced world or the population of somewhere like a Forge world, and it gives them slow and purposeful and feel no pain 6-up, plus makes them best friends with the Mechanicum. Alchem Jackers represents those units who keep up morale through the use of drugs. They basically gain stubborn in assault and get pinned instead of falling back from shooting, but you're also able to give any of your units friends on for 25 points, which gives them furious charge. Survivors of the Dark Age represents planets who have retained a load of their ancient STC data and allows those veteran units to take rhinos, land raiders, or termites as transports. They cost the same as the Astartes versions, but they gain the third line rule and reduce their ballistic skill to 3. Nevertheless, that does open up a lot of older model ranges to use. You also get the option to give your recon squads 2 pistols and a jetpack and call them void jumpers. Not really sure what that applies to. Armory of Old Night gives you access to better weaponry. Your lasgun armed infantry squads can take Solar Auxilia las rifles. Your veteran units can take Volkites or swap everything out for various sorts of needle weapons. And your Force Commander can have a Paragon Blade or an Archaeotech pistol. Good for a cut price Solar Auxilia. Feral Warriors is then kind of the opposite. Everyone gets +1 weapon skill on the charge, but must always charge, and you can buy chain axes for them, which opens up a whole different model range. Kinfolk Helots is the squat option. If you want to field some classic squats or some more modern Votan, this provenance gives them +1 toughness at the cost of -1 movement and initiative, and grants all your characters the Battlesmith rule. And Abhuman Muster is the Beastman option. Your army gains +1 strength, but loses +1 ballistic skill, and all your characters get Hammer of Wrath because of, headbutts. And then neither of these can be taken alongside the third Abhuman option, Ogryn Conscripts, which makes Ogryn squads troops choices, and if you select them as compulsory troops choices, gives them line. For a totally different feel, we have Industrial Stronghold, which is the closest we're going to get to an armoured company option. You still need some infantry, but this allows Liman Russes to be taken in much bigger squadrons. And the opposite of that is the Unending Horde, which drops your Grenadier squads to being elites choices, but then allows all your regular infantry to recycle back onto the battlefield when they're killed. And finally, we get the two classic traitor-only provenances that represent the debased cultists of the Chaos Gods. Debased Rabble gives your models Crusader and Hatred everything, but restricts Grenadier squads, and Tainted Flesh gives everyone Fear and Furious Charge, but heavily restricts a load of other units, kind of forcing you to take an army of Levy and Rogue Psychers. Yeah, so it's a lot. There are some restrictions on what you can combine. A Debased Rabble can't also be Survivors of the Dark Age, but mostly you're free to combine any two and build the crazy army of your dreams. In terms of Force Commander models, this is your chance to go all out. Obviously, we could go the easy route and use an Astra Militarum officer. That will be the easy route for everything here. But since these characters might be a level above just a military officer, there are loads of options from Blackstone Fortress models to Age of Sigmar ones. My Force Commander here is an old Dark Elf Black Guard model with the head from a Redemptionist. Okay, let's go through the rest. First, the Discipline Master Corps is a support squad that allows you to select up to 12 2-wound character models with a selection of weapon options who can then be attached to other units in your army. They're essentially a commissar. If the unit fails a morale check, the Discipline Master can execute D3 models and get a reroll, and the Master itself is Leadership 8, so he already improves the leadership of the unit, though they're not stubborn or anything, so if you lose combat more than 1 or 2, then that reroll won't really count for much. For models, the most important thing is that they're recognizable. I use guys with peaked commissar hats and whips, but regular commissars, loyalist or traitor would work too, or if you can get hold of them, the old Renegades and Heretics Discipline Masters would be good. You can also upgrade these to be mounted just like the Force Commander. We'll get to those in a minute. The Rogue Psyker is also a support squad, but can only be taken by traitors. You get 1 Psyker who can then take up to 10 Wardens in the same unit to keep an eye on them and be ablative wounds. They basically have the same abilities as a Legion Esoterist, a 12-shot Void Dart psychic power, and the ability to bring in demon units from reserve nearby. But they are only Leadership 7, so good luck with the Perils rolls. For models, there are options in the Chaos or Genestealer Cultist ranges, the Blackstone Fortress game, Resin Necromunda models, or even regular Imperial Guard Psychers. I use these old Forge World Psychers. And finally in HQ, for the more traditional military forces, you have the Militia Command Corps, also a support squad, but one that can be selected as a retinue for your Force Commander. The squad consists of a lieutenant and 4 guys, but it can go up to 20 models, all armed with las guns and flak armor, and with the standard veteran stat line. That's all the 3s, but they have leadership 6, not 5. They can have their armor upgraded to Carapace, can take a Nuncio Vox or a banner, can swap their weapons for las carbines, bolt guns or shotguns, and the lieutenant can take a selection of close combat weapons. Also, 1 bodyguard can take a special weapon. I'm going to assume that these are basically going to be whatever you use for your infantry, but fancier, though in a cultist army, the new 40k cult leader box might work quite well. Then we get to troops. There are 3 basic troops choices here that will comprise the majority of militia armies and are affected by all those provenances above. Infantry squads, levy squads, and grenadier squads. Infantry squads are your basic troopers. 20 models at base leadership 5 plus a sergeant, with guardsman stats and armed with las guns or auto guns and flak armor. They can swap those 24 range rapid firing las guns for las carbines, that's an 18-inch Assault 2 version, stub carbines, 12-inch Assault 3 versions, and shotguns, which are 12-inch Assault 2 with concussive. And they also get the option of the classic las pistol and basic close combat weapon. All those weapons are strength 3 and will pop up again and again through the list. Other than that, they can have a flag, they can have bayonets, the sergeant can take a chainsword, and one model can take a special weapon. They cannot add additional models. They also have the strength in numbers rule, which lets you take up to 3 units for each troop slot you have, because they're so cheap you run out of slots pretty quickly otherwise. Even worse than them is the Militia Levy Squad. 20 models again, but with options to go up to 50 at a cost of 2 points per model. These are the same as infantry squads, but with weapon skill and ballistic skill 2, and they don't come with frag grenades. Your only options are to take bayonets, to swap their las guns for close combat weapons and pistols, to take a flag, or to buy back the frag grenades. They're just really cheap. They also have the strength in numbers rule, and they're expendable, so your opponent never gets victory points for killing them, but also the minute they fail a morale check, they're dead. And finally, we have the Grenadier Squad. This is, again, the same as an infantry squad, but they have 1 higher leadership and are kitted out with a lasgun, pistol, frag and crack grenades, close combat weapon, and carapace armor as standard. So they're your, good troops choice. Unfortunately, they have the support squad rule, but there are provenances that will remove this. So it's possible to have a veteran human army if you want. They all get the same options as the infantry squad, with the addition of bolt guns to the list of weapon swaps, the option to take a Nuncio Vox, and 2 special weapon choices. Also, it's worth saying that infantry squads and grenadier squads are the only line choices in the army, so you're going to need to have one of them. So that's the 3 basic troops choices. There are, of course, a million ways to model these, depending on your provenances. The basic option would be using Astra Militarum models, but pretty much anything works, from Chaos Cultists to League of Votan to Genestealer cults to most of the Necromunda range. Even Skitarii will work, given that they don't appear in that Mechanicum list. The important thing is to make sure that it's easy for your opponent to tell which of these squads is which. You might not be using all 3 of these sorts of unit, but they do all do really different things, and your opponent should be able to tell which are infantry and which are levy without having to ask every time. There are loads of ways to do this. The classic old Imperial Guard technique would be to paint the helmets of your conscript levies white, and then use, say, Kazakin as your grenadiers. In my Renegade army, I use Blackstone Fortress style Traitor Guard for the infantry, Forge World Renegades for grenadiers, and command squads, easily recognizable by their creepy hoods, and then robed cultists or zombie-like models for levy. Again, there's a load of ways to do this, but it is important to think about. Right, aside from those, there are 2 more troops units to look at. Both are support squads. A fire support squad consists of 3 to 10 heavy weapons teams with any of the standard Imperial Guard heavy weapons, but also a multi-laser. They have the emplaced rule, which limits them to certain reactions, and like levies, means if they're forced to fall back, they're just destroyed. And then we have the Militia Reconnaissance Squad, 5 to 10 regular guys with shotguns who can swap out for stub carbines or las carbines, and who have scout, infiltrate, and move through cover. 5 of them can take either sniper rifles or long las, which are different things in this army. A long las swaps the sniper rifle's rending for sunder and has strength 6, but it's only half range. These are the guys who can get jetpacks and twin pistols if you take Survivors of the Dark Age provenance. And I imagine what models you use for these will just depend on what your normal infantry are. Okay, on to elites. We'll start with an easy one. The Medicae detachment is 3 mini apothecaries who, like the Discipline Masters, get attached to other units. They give the unit 6 up, feel no pain. No idea what you'd use for models here. The Guard range has some options, but there are a couple of nice Blackstone Fortress models, and I guess the traitors don't really take them? And then in elites, we have Ogryns. The Ogryn Brute Squad is a pretty flexible unit that can be built to represent kind of any of the Ogryn or Ogre models that Games Workshop sell. The basic squad's 3 Ogryns with flak armor and close combat weapons, but they can each be given a Ripper gun, Thunderstub, boarding shield, or a second close combat weapon, and you can expand the size of the unit up to 10 models and take a leader with a selection of much scarier weapons. Also, the old version of this army stated that the Brute Squad doesn't just have to represent Ogryns. There are a lot of other lumbering big guys out there that might be more thematic. And then the final elite's choice is the Field Gun Battery, a new addition that basically allows you to make use of the new Astra Militarum artillery box set. You get 1 to 6 field guns for 45 points each. They also get that emplaced rule, so if they need to fall back, they're gone. Next, on to what is actually a pretty flexible fast attack section. We'll start with the Humble Arvus Lighter. This is a flying brick with 2 hull points and a transport capacity of 12. It has the infantry transport rule, which stops you putting Ogryns in it, and it's not an assault vehicle. So this is mostly for small objective grabbing units, maybe a grenadier unit with some special weapons. You can get this from Forge World. If you want to transport any more than that, we end up with the stock transport option for militias worldwide. A truck. The Cargo 8 Hauler is the kit for Necromunda that's been repurposed here, and it's also a fast attack choice. There are no dedicated transport options in this list, unless you take Survivors of the Dark Age to get access to rhinos. So the Cargo 8 is a 3-hull point, 12, 11, 10 vehicle with a transport capacity of 22 and the ability to take an armoured container on its back, which drops its transport cap to 12 but allows you to take extra weapons. At 50 points, it's actually not that bad, and they come in squadrons of up to 3. If you don't want to take the Necromunda model, I guess the other option here is the Orc Battle Wagon or the Genestealer Goliath truck. And then we get to the unit we all secretly wanted in Heresy, Militia Cavalry. Right, so obviously they're not great to start with, flak armoured guardsmen, but this time on horses or dirt bikes or any other mount and armed with las pistols and basic close combat weapons. The horsey gives you the cavalry subtype, movement 14, relentless, scout, and Hammer of Wrath, and that's the same upgrade that Force Commanders and Discipline Masters get if you make them mounted. And then the squad can be upgraded with any of the shorter ranged basic weapons and a single special weapon, but the real fun here is the Militia Lance. The Lance is a Strength 7 AP3 single attack pokey stick that you can only use on the charge, which comes with Brutal 2 and Sudden Strike 2, so it has a good chance of actually killing regular Astartes. The cavalry will of course all be killed the turn after, but considering they have Scout, that means that a suicidal outflanking cavalry charge is totally possible and might actually be quite scary. For models, obviously the Astra Militarum Rough Riders the obvious choice, but Genestealer dirt bikes, any of the crazy Necromunda mounted models, and a ton of fantasy models also fit the description. A new Fast Attack edition next. The Militia Beastmasters unit is very similar to the Sisters of Silence version. You get 3 to 7 Beastmasters who are just regular militia, but they can each take either a dog, cat, crocodile, or burb to go and peck people to death. The dog gets Furious Charge, the cat gets Rage, the crocodile's tough, and the burb's hard to hit. And if the Beastmasters all die first, which they definitely will, the beasts just attack the closest enemy unit each turn. For models, the Necromunda range is probably what you want here, but also some of the Kill Team gangs might work well. An army of Arbites with Cybermastiffs or Naval Crew with Canids might be fun. And then we're on to Militia Sentinels. Lightweight walkers armed with a single heavy weapon, Sentinels are, like all other walkers, treated more like big monsters than vehicles. They're the only unit with the mechanized subtype, which is basically a way of giving them similar rules to Dreadnoughts and Automata. More resilient to poison weapons, vulnerable to armor-bane weapons, and haywire, able to move and fire with their heavy weapon. It's actually not nearly as bad as either the third line or militia subtypes. Sentinels are, of course, Astra Militarum models, but other ranges include similar models. And then finally in Fast Attack, we have the only plane in the list. The Militia Thunderbolt Fighter is pretty tough for a plane, 12, 11, 10 with 3 hull points, though it is third line. It's armed with 4 autocannon and 2 las cannon, but it doesn't get the cool missiles that the Solar Auxilia or Astartes versions get. This is a Forge World model, though like everything else on the list, other flying models might be appropriate. Okay, on to heavy support, and we start with the Militia Rapier Battery, eating up a heavy support slot where they'd usually be elites. The Rapier team gets access to all the same weapons as the Astartes and Solar Auxilia versions, with the exception of any decent shells for their quad launchers, they just get frag, plus the change that they come with 3 crew each instead of 2. You'll have to convert the crew though, as the actual Rapiers can only be bought with Auxilia or Astartes crew. We then get the mainstay battle tank of the list, which is the Malcador. At the time of the Heresy, this was the tank issued to most second and third line regiments, and it comes with all the options it can have, including the Gravis las cannon or battle cannon turret, hull-mounted demolisher cannon, and a full suite of sponson weapons. Notable here is that it only has a standard Gravis las cannon, whereas the Astartes versions have a twin Gravis las cannon, which is probably a typo, but hey. Otherwise, it's a pretty tough 5 hull point vehicle, especially considering the cost. The standard Malcador is a great big lump of Forge World resin. And then hot on its heels is the Liman Russ. Now, in the fluff, the Liman Russ was only just being issued to militia forces, and as a new pattern, they tended to be concentrated into armoured companies, which means that this slot can only contain 1 single tank. If you want more, you need to take Industrialized Stronghold as a provenance, and then you can take up to 6 in each slot. Otherwise, these are standard Liman Russ tanks with most of the options available in the Astra Militarum kit. Next up, we have the Heavy Ordnance Battery. This works like a bigger version of the Rapier carriage. It's an artillery piece armed with either an Earthshaker or Medusa siege gun, crewed by a minimum of 4 crew. You can have up to 3 platforms and up to 20 crew in the unit, which is useful because you need 2 crew per gun alive to fire them at full efficiency. These are currently available as part of the Death Core of Krieg range from Forge World. And then finally, in heavy support, we get the transport we always wanted back. At 250 points, it's the Gorgon Heavy Transporter, an 8-hull point super heavy boat with 15 armor on the front and only 10 on the back that can carry 40 models. It doesn't have the assault vehicle rule, which is bloody stupid, and it's armed with a Gorgon mortar and fewer stubbers than the model actually has on it, but you can upgrade it to have 6 las cannons, so that's something. Also, with armor 15 on the front and super heavy, it's quite good at just squashing other vehicles, which is a fun way to use it. The model's available from Forge World once again, and apparently the retooled model doesn't require half a tub of milliput to build, which is what my one did. And then finally, the only Lord of War in the list is the Militia Baneblade. Just the basic one for 350 points less than it would cost a Space Marine player. This can take all the standard sponsor options, but that's it. But I guess it's now cheap enough to actually use. And that's the list. As you can see there are a lot of options here, and given the costs involved, you can fit a lot of them into your army. The way provenances work, though, generally means that you probably won't be taking half these units in a specific army. Most militia armies or allied detachments are going to be built around 1 or 2 of these units with a few others in support, rather than 1 of each. I guess that's kind of how the Astartes list works too. One of the best things about this list is how many existing 40k armies suddenly become usable in Heresy. I have loads of human 40k forces that this would represent pretty well, and that I can't really wait to try out. It gives them something of a new lease of life. In the first edition of Heresy, I built this huge pink renegade army, which can still be fielded in a few ways. Debased rabble and endless horde, and the concentrating on levy and infantry squads would give me a horde of idiots that recycle again and again, and still leave some room for the bigger tanks. I think I've figured out that I could fit 250 models, 6 rapiers, 2 malcadors, a gorgon, a thunderbolt, and a baneblade, all in 3,000 points. On the other hand, it includes a whole pink armored company, so industrial stronghold and something like warrior elites to hold objectives could work. I have an old hammer metal squat army who'd be represented well by taking survivors of the Dark Age and kinfolk helots. That would give them squat-like stats while retaining the old flak armor and las guns, and allow them to take land raiders and rhinos like they had back in Rogue Trader. Thud guns and mole mortars could be represented by the field ordnance unit. The only missing thing here would be a good Exo Squat equivalent, but maybe that's like an allied detachment of Terminators or something. I could even make the Adeptus Arbites work in this. Warrior Elite would make Grenadiers compulsory troops, and they have carapace armor, grenade launchers, and can take shotguns and bolt guns. The Beastmasters would be good for the Cyber Mastiffs, and then I could take either Legacies of the Great Crusade to give them +1 ballistic skill, or maybe Survivors of Old Night to give them back rhinos. And of course, my platoon of old 90s Rough Riders can join up with my White Scars army as an allied detachment of Chagorian tribesmen, taking clanfolk levy to make cavalry squads troops, and then feral warriors to give them a chance of actually hitting Astartes when they arrive from their flanking assault. So yeah, look, I can't see any of these lists winning that often. It does a really good job of making it clear just how outclassed regular humans are on the Heresy battlefield, but it is really thematic and will hopefully allow a load of people to dust off some old models and get them back on the tabletop. So if you want to play Militia, yeah, good luck. Thanks for watching. And if you'd like to see more Heresy army guides, then you can check out the link just popping up there on the right. And if you'd like to support the channel, there's a link to the Patreon at the thing below. See ya!